I was born in Maine, the child of immigrants who had fled from a mysterious African tribe. My parents never spoke about it openly, except for their dark warnings. "That land is not for you," my father would say, his voice trembling with a fear I couldn't understand. "It's cursed. We fled to protect you." For years I ignored their words, but there was always a hunger in me, an insatiable curiosity. One night, as I was scrolling through Facebook, I got a friend request from an account I didn't recognize. The name was Helena W., and her profile picture showed a young woman with striking African features and a mysterious smile. "Hi, cousin. I finally found you," she said in her first message. "Cousin?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, my parents spoke of you and your family often. We come from the same lineage." Her words intrigued me. I had never heard of her before. My parents never mentioned any family in Africa. But her messages fascinated me, filled with tales of traditions and secrets about a tribe I knew nothing about. Despite my parents' warnings, I kept my conversations with her a secret. There was something in those stories, a pull I couldn't resist no matter how dark they seemed. A few weeks later, I decided to go out to clear my head. I ended up at a small, hidden bar on the edge of a snow-covered forest. That's where I saw her. She was breathtaking, hypnotically beautiful, with dark eyes that seemed to look straight into my soul. "You look lost," she said with a soft smile. Her voice was gentle, but something about it unsettled me. Her name was Adelia. We talked for hours, laughing and exchanging stories, but there was something strange about her words, references to witchcraft and curses always punctuated with laughter. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't resist her. When she suggested we go somewhere more private, I agreed without hesitation. In the car, the air felt electric. Each of her touches awakened something inside me. "Come here," she whispered, pulling me close. "Let's forget the world outside." Her lips were warm, soft, each kiss igniting a fire within me. Soon, we were lost in each other, our bodies moving together in the dim light of the car. Her touch was intoxicating, her whispered words drawing me in deeper. At one point, she pulled back, her expression unreadable. "I need to pee," she said casually, opening the car door. "Seriously? Here, in the middle of the road?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Nature doesn't wait," she replied with a wink before disappearing into the trees. I called out to her, but there was no answer. The silence of the night pressed down on me. No sign of her anywhere, as if she had never been there at all. My chest tightened with panic. I ran back to the car and dialed home, but what I found there made my blood run cold. There was blood everywhere. Stains on the floor, the couch, the walls. It was chaos. My phone buzzed, breaking the suffocating silence. A message from Helena. "I hope you enjoyed our night together, cousin." I froze, the air around me suddenly frigid. I opened her profile again and my breath caught. The woman in her profile picture wasn't Helena anymore. It was Adelia. And the other photos, the ones that once showed Helena's smiling face, now revealed someone else entirely. A woman with depthless dark eyes and a sinister smile. I went back to the bar the next day, desperate for answers. "Adelia?" I asked the bartender. "I met her here last night. Do you know where she lives?" The man gave me a strange look. "Adelia? She died a year ago. A car accident. It was horrible." My world crumbled. How was this possible? I went to the cemetery and found her headstone. It was surrounded by others marked with tribal symbols, the same ones Helena had told me about. Desperate, I fell to my knees. My phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. "You opened the door to them," it read. "Now they'll come for you. Run and never look back." When I returned home, everything felt different. The air was icy, the light dim, as if shadows had claimed every corner. As I walked through the hallway, I heard whispers. The door to my room creaked shut on its own, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Fear consumed me. I ran outside, the streetlights flickering above me. The trees swayed, and I swear they were watching me. Each shadow felt alive. Each gust of wind carried whispers. I jumped into my car only to find it different. The bloodstains were gone. but the air was thick with a bitter, unfamiliar scent. I felt something move in the back seat. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel and sped down the dark, winding road. I need to get out of here, I thought, but where could I go? Everywhere felt wrong, haunted. And then I saw her, standing in the middle of the road, her cold smile fixed on me. "Helena, run, Marcus. There's no escaping them," she said, her voice a haunting whisper. I ran. I didn't look back, but I knew it wasn't over. Some traditions should never be forgotten. I've always been fascinated by antiques. Holding something that has passed through decades, maybe even centuries, always made me feel connected to the past. But I never imagined that curiosity would bring me face to face with something that should have stayed forgotten. It all started at an antique fair in the suburbs of the city. The stalls lined a narrow, dusty street, and the air was filled with the scent of aged wood mixed with perfumed candles. I wasn't planning to buy anything, just wandering until one particular stall caught my eye. The seller was a short man with graying hair and sunken eyes that seemed to see far more than anyone else could. Among the many items on his table, clocks, compasses, music boxes, one golden pocket watch stood out. At first glance, it seemed simple, but as I moved closer, I noticed intricate symbols etched into the lid. They were mesmerizing yet unsettling. "You like the watch?" the seller asked, his voice gravelly and drawn out. "Yes, it's unique. What's the story behind it?" The man gave a strange smile, as though hesitating to say too much. He picked up the watch, turning it slowly in his hands, and replied, "It's a special piece, kid. Not for just anyone. I'll only sell it if you promise to take good care of it." I should have picked up on the strange tone in his voice, but I was too intrigued by the watch to care. He charged me an absurdly low price, as if he were more eager to be rid of the watch than to make money from it. I left the stall feeling triumphant, thinking I had discovered a true relic. When I got home, I was eager to examine my new treasure. Under the soft glow of my desk lamp, the watch was even more beautiful. The runes etched into the lid seemed to shimmer faintly under the light, captivating and unnerving at the same time. When I opened it, a faint puff of warm air brushed against my face as though the watch had exhaled. I brushed off the strange sensation and looked inside. The hands were frozen at midnight, and the protective glass seemed oddly foggy, as though something was trapped inside. I found it odd, but dismissed it as my imagination. I placed the watch on my bedside table and went to bed, but the night was far from peaceful. I woke abruptly around 3 a.m. to the sound of loud ticking. It filled the room, even though my bedside clock had been broken for years. When I looked at the pocket watch, it was open, its hands spinning wildly, yet still stuck at midnight. My breath caught as something in the mirror across from my bed caught my eye. For a split second, I saw a tall, thin shadow with eyes that glowed like embers. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The ticking stopped just as abruptly as it had started. The next day, I returned to the fair to confront the seller, but his stall was gone. I asked the other vendors about him, but none seemed to know who he was. An older man looked at me with concern and asked, "Did he sell you something?" I showed him the watch, and the man took a step back, visibly uneasy. "Get rid of it, kid. Some things aren't meant to be kept for long." I ignored his warning, but that night, the strange occurrences escalated. I was sitting on the couch reading a book when the lights began to flicker. The ticking sound returned, louder this time, echoing through the house. I went to my room and found the watch open again on the bedside table, even though I was sure I had closed it. I picked it up, and as my fingers touched the metal, a wave of heat shot through my body. A whisper brushed against my ear, low and incomprehensible, but dripping with malice. Determined to find answers, I spent hours scouring obscure forums online. Eventually, I stumbled upon a story that chilled me to the bone. The watch was known as the Midnight Keeper. It once belonged to a cult that believed they had found a way to open portals to other dimensions. The symbols etched on the lid were summoning runes. Anyone who opened the watch without performing the proper ritual would release something that could never be contained. As I read, a notification appeared on my computer. Midnight is approaching. I tried to close the window, but it kept reappearing. Suddenly, the screen went black, and a blood-red message flashed. You opened it. Now it's yours. A cold sweat drenched me as the watch began to vibrate on the table, its ticking louder than ever, accompanied by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. That night, I knew I wasn't alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it. Something watching me. Always. I decided to get rid of the watch. I drove to a nearby forest and dug a deep hole. As I buried it, faint laughter echoed around me, mocking my attempt to escape. When I returned home, I felt an eerie calm, as though I had finally rid myself of the burden. But as I entered my bedroom, my heart sank. The watch was back on the bedside table. This time the hands had moved. Midnight was 5 minutes away. Desperate, I sought help from a local exorcist. He offered only a grim warning. It's already claimed you, there's no escape. The next night, as the watch struck midnight, everything changed. The lights went out, and a massive shadow filled the room. Its eyes glowed, the same burning embers I had seen in the mirror. You opened the door, it whispered, its voice resonating through the house. I tried to run, but the shadow enveloped me. The last thing I heard was the deafening sound of ticking, now impossibly fast, as if time itself was unraveling. When I woke up, I was in a strange place, a vast, endless darkness. The watch was in my pocket, and its hands spun relentlessly. Now I understood. I wasn't its owner anymore. I was its keeper. No one else will open the door, I thought as the ticking echoed into eternity. Before the next story, subscribe to motivate me and help the channel. Ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by the dark stories my grandmother used to tell about our ancestral village in Angola. She spoke of a spirit called Nzumbi Ya Kufa, a force that brought curses upon those who dared to break sacred traditions. Never look at the full moon's reflection in the river at night, my grandmother would warn, her voice heavy with fear. Those who do never come back the same. Her words stayed with me, but my curiosity always burned brighter. Now, as an adult tired of city life, I decided to travel to that abandoned village my family had left decades ago. I needed to know if the stories were true. When I arrived late in the afternoon, the place felt frozen in time, surrounded by a forest so dense it seemed to swallow everything around it. The few remaining houses were crumbling ruins. An old woman, Doña Amelia, a friend of my grandmother, was the only person still living there. She greeted me with a wary look. "Why have you come here, boy? There's nothing for you here, only suffering," she said, handing me a cup of bitter tea and insisting I leave at sunrise. That night I ignored Doña Amelia's warnings. An irresistible pull urged me to explore the ruins. The full moon bathed the village in an eerie light. My wandering led me to the river, the same river from my grandmother's stories. As I gazed at the moon's reflection on the water, something rooted me in place. The shadows seemed to dance across the surface. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I knelt by the riverbank and stared directly at the shimmering reflection. What happened next is hard to explain. The water started to ripple, almost as if it were alive. A sound echoed, a mix of a wail and a song. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. That's when I saw her. A woman emerged from the forest. Her long, dark hair framed a face shrouded in shadow, and her piercing eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. She wore an old, tattered cloak, and there was something otherworldly about her presence. "You are lost, child of the foreigner," she said, her voice soft but unnervingly heavy. I froze, unable to move. I tried to speak, but no words came out. She stepped closer, stopping just a breath away from me. "You looked at the river, didn't you?" She took my hand, and I couldn't resist. It felt like my body was no longer mine to control. She led me deeper into the forest, to a clearing where the moonlight couldn't reach. Torches formed a circle around us, casting flickering shadows over strange symbols drawn on the ground, symbols that looked like they were made with blood. Around the circle stood hooded figures, murmuring in an unfamiliar language. In the center was an altar, covered with a black cloth. "You have awakened Nzumbi Ya Kufa," the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And now it demands a sacrifice." She pulled back the cloth, revealing a human skull adorned with tribal symbols and animal fangs. A guttural scream erupted from all directions, echoing through the forest. I turned to run, but the hooded figures closed in, their chants growing louder and more intense. My chest began to burn. I looked down and saw that one of the symbols from the ground was now glowing on my skin. "You will carry the curse unless you find someone to replace you," the woman said, staring deep into my eyes. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the forest. The torches, the hooded figures, and the woman were gone. I stumbled back to Doña Amelia's house, but the scene I found froze my blood. She was dead. Her body was lifeless on the floor, and the same glowing symbol that had burned on my chest was now marked on her forehead. I left the village that same day, but something followed me. When I returned to the city, the nightmares began. Every night I saw her face, the woman from the river staring at me. I heard the chants again, felt the burning sensation in my chest. People around me started avoiding me, saying the air turned colder whenever I was near. Then, one day, I got a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of me kneeling at the river, staring at the moon's reflection. The caption read, "The cycle has begun." That's when I realized what I had to do. Desperate, I started luring people to the village. I made up stories, told them they had an inheritance waiting for them. Deep down, I knew I was trying to find someone to take my place. But no one ever came back. They all disappeared, and the weight on my chest only grew heavier. Now I know I'm trapped. I can't escape, only delay the inevitable. In my nightmares, the woman always appears, her glowing eyes and cold smile haunting me. "You can't escape, you can only postpone," she whispers. As I write this, I can feel Nzumbi Yakufa's presence. The forest, the river, and that woman, they're always calling me back. Some traditions cannot be broken, and some curses can never be undone. I know my time is running out. It's not a matter of if, but when. I don't know how to start this story without sounding insane, but I need to tell you what I experienced that night. I've always been a skeptic, the kind of person who mocks tales of witches and sorcery. Now, as I recall what I saw and felt, I deeply regret ever doubting. It all began when I decided to visit the small town where my grandmother was born, a village lost between hills and forests. The place is called Old Crossroads, and the very name carries a dark aura. I went there because I had inherited my family's old house, abandoned for decades. I wanted to sell it, but to do that I needed to inspect the place. Deep down, I thought I could spend a night or two in the old house and return with some fun stories. An adventure that would make for good Instagram posts and laughs among friends. I was wrong. When I arrived at the village, I noticed something was off. People gave me sideways glances, as if they knew something I didn't. In the tiny market, an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin grabbed my arm as I walked past her. "You're Amelia's kin, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes stern. Amelia was my grandmother, but I was surprised. No one had mentioned her in years. "Yes, she was my grandmother. Why? Don't stay in that house after sunset." "I'm sorry, but..." She didn't let me finish. Her eyes went glassy and she whispered something strange. "The witch waits." A chill ran down my spine, but I laughed nervously. These small-town stories always seem too folkloric, you know? So I paid for my groceries and headed straight to the house. The house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by gnarled trees and a sense of abandonment that seemed to swallow the sunlight. It was as if the forest was trying to pull the house back into itself. With some effort, I pushed the old door open and stepped inside. The floor creaked under my feet. Inside, the smell of mold and rotting wood was suffocating. There were furniture pieces covered with yellowed, dusty sheets and cobwebs everywhere. I spent the first few hours tidying up and exploring the rooms. I found an old photo album in one of the bedrooms. There were pictures of my grandmother as a young woman, but one image caught my attention. A tall, thin woman dressed in black, standing in the background near the forest. Her face was blurry, but she seemed to be staring directly at me. I remembered the old woman's words at the market, but I shook my head and tried to ignore them. I continued exploring the house. In the attic, I found a box full of old letters. Some were addressed to my grandmother, but others had unknown senders. All of them mentioned something they called the promise. There were phrases like, "You must fulfill it, and the price will be paid." One letter was stained with what looked like black wax and contained only 2 words. She waits. The sun began to set and the cold came quickly. Even in summer, the house grew freezing at dusk. I lit a flashlight and prepared a small snack, but my appetite disappeared when I heard the first sound, a faint whisper coming from the hallway. "It's probably just the wind," I murmured to myself. With each passing minute, the sound grew clearer. It sounded like a voice, a distant feminine voice, murmuring words I couldn't understand. I grabbed the flashlight and tried to locate the source of the sound. I walked through the entire house, but the whisper seemed to move as if it were avoiding me. At one point, the voice stopped abruptly, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But then, something else happened. One of the pictures on the wall fell on its own. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, and I turned quickly. Where the picture had been hanging, there was something carved into the wall. A strange symbol, like a triangle with curved lines around it. Fear began to take hold, but I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Curiosity is a curse. Even terrified, I decided to follow the sound. The house was dark, and the weak beam of the flashlight made the shadows dance. The whispers led me to the basement. The door, which had been locked before, was now ajar. I shouldn't, I thought. But I descended the stairs. The air grew colder and heavier. When I reached the bottom, I saw something that made me freeze. On the floor, drawn in charcoal, was a summoning circle. Extinguished candles were scattered around, and at the center lay an ancient book with a black leather cover and an engraved symbol I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I approached. I picked up the book. The pages were written in a strange language, and on some of them, red stains that looked like blood. That's when I heard it. A laugh, a low, drawn-out laugh coming from behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only the darkness of the basement. "Who's there?" My voice came out weak, almost a whisper. The laughter stopped, and then the voice replied, "You've returned, Amelia." I froze. That feminine voice wasn't human. It was hoarse, ancient, as if it came from another world. The flashlight flickered and went out. I felt something brush against the back of my neck, like an icy breath. I began to hear footsteps around me, but I couldn't see anything. My breathing was rapid, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I ran up the stairs, tripping and nearly falling. When I finally reached the door, it slammed shut in my face. I banged on it desperately, screaming, but the voice returned, "You can't escape!" The door opened on its own, and I ran out without looking back. I don't remember how I got out of the basement. The only thing I know is that when I regained consciousness, I was lying in the middle of the road, far from the house. My body was covered in scratches and dirt. I never went back to that house or the village. Days later, I researched more about my grandmother's history. I discovered she had been accused of witchcraft in her youth. They said she was part of a cult that summoned something that should never be named. The villagers believed that to escape, my grandmother had sealed the entity in that basement. The house was the seal itself, and I had broken it. But that wasn't the end. For days, I continued hearing the voice even far away, whispers in the dead of night, shadows that seemed to move on their own. One night, I woke up to find strange marks on my arms, as if claws had scratched my skin. Since then, I've known no peace. "She waits," the old woman had said. Now I understand what she meant. Every night I hear that voice whispering in the darkness of my room, calling my name. Once I saw a reflection in the mirror, a pair of glowing red eyes watching me from the shadows. And I know that sooner or later she will come for me. I'm going to bring you a super interesting story tomorrow, so subscribe to be notified.